from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. So, Delaware Congresswoman Sarah McBride, who's a dude, was in town the other day and stopped by University of Chicago's Institute for Political Skullduggery to be interviewed by David Axelrod. Fortunately, UFC has this group called Chicago Thinker, and these are some students at the University of Chicago that are connecting dots, challenging the leftist orthodoxy that persists on campus. So one critical thinker and member of Chicago Thinker, Akshay Kirthi, asked Representative McBride about a statement he made before a grade school class. This was the question.
My name's Akshay Kirthi. I'm a third year in the college majoring in biology. I saw a video of you in an elementary school classroom teaching to what looks like kindergartners, where you were reading a book called Jazz and Friends, and you gave the commentary that, quote, she went with her family to the doctor, and the doctor said that she's a girl, and everyone should see her and treat her like a girl, and, quote, like Jazz said, that makes her a little different from some of the other kids, and Jazz at the end talks about how being different is good. Do you think that it's appropriate to tell impressionable children who think that the tooth fairy is real that it's good to go to the doctor and transition socially and eventually with hormones and surgery when these children barely understand what gender is?
So that's not what I said. I said that...
I have a quote.
He does have a quote, and we have the video that Mr. Kirthi was referring to, and McBride said exactly what Kirthi said he said. Here it is.
She went with her family to the doctor, and the doctor said that she's a girl, and everyone should see her and treat her like a girl, right? Which is to say that they should call her Jazz, and they should treat her with respect and be nice to her. But can I ask you one more question? So that journey that she had from people thinking she was a boy and the fact that Jazz knew she was a girl to her parents and her friends accepting her as the girl that she is, that journey is called being transgender. And like Jazz said, that makes her a little different from some of the other kids. And Jazz at the end talks about how being different is good, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think the propagandizing that was characterized in the question is spot on. So then bring it back the good Congresswoman McBride to contextualize what he was saying when he said what you just heard in front of that elementary school class.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you what that quote was. That quote was, being different is good. That it's good that we have differences in society, that society would be very boring if everyone was exactly the same. Not that being trans is good or bad, but that diversity in our society is good, and we should value diversity. That's what that was saying, one. Two, I was at a job, it was 7 years ago. All of those young people there were there with parental permission, because at the end of the day, I don't believe that anyone is too young to learn to be kind. And that's what that was about.
It was just about kindness, of course. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Christine Rosen, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Christine, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Is Sarah McBride being forthright when he says that passage from Jazz, the Jazz book, the Jazz pro-trans book, and his characterization before that elementary school class was just teaching kindness?
Not at all. And in fact, I think what we've seen with the more radical members of the trans rights movement is weaponization of tolerance. Look, Americans are actually generally a tolerant people. This is a good part of our character. But I think what you see people like McBride and others doing is saying, unless you accept what I claim about biology, which we know to be false, then you are intolerant or a bigot. There's no conversation actually allowed. And when someone challenges someone like McBride, like this speaker did in the clip that you played earlier, then McBride has no response except to backpedal and deny. And as we saw from the results of the most recent presidential election, they're trying to do that. They're trying to claim that, we're persuading people. But there's no persuasion here. There is a claim that is not based in biology and reality, and it's made over and over again, often to children. And if you challenge that claim, you are considered a bigot. And that is not how America works. That's not how we persuade each other to be tolerant and accepting. And I think the trans movement is starting to discover that people are pushing back on that message.
Well, the one thing that McBride said that was the tell that he was lying, that is that he's not saying being trans is good or bad. He's just saying it's different and diversity is good. I mean, give me a break. The celebration of trans couldn't be more full-throated. You're not saying it's good. Yeah, you're right. You're not saying it's good. You're saying it's great. It's excellent. It's the best thing going.
Well, and one of the challenges here is that we know that the trans movement has committed active harm, first to minors who are being subjected to medical procedures that have long-term health consequences for them. But more broadly, I think there's this effort to decide that tolerance means you have to accept someone else's version of reality about themselves. And what that means is that you have biological men imposing on women-only spaces, invading women's privacy, competing against women in sports in ways that Americans generally find fundamentally unfair and dangerous. And I think that's where they're starting to be on the back foot in this argument, because people are speaking up and saying that's not right, that's not fair. Your right to be who you claim you are doesn't mean I have to risk my privacy, my physical safety, or my kids' health to satisfy that claim.
Right, and this I always say this on the show. It's like, yes, Trump is in the White House, but this battle rages on. The Minnesota Supreme Court just recently ruled 7-0 decision. Now it is Minnesota, but that's what I'm saying. The battle rages state by state. Minnesota Supreme Court ruled 7-0. A man pretending to be a woman was discriminated against by USA Powerlifting that kept him from being allowed to compete against women, and so he shall be allowed to compete. Now, this is, this is limited to Minnesota, and but this is happening in federal court too, and this is going to continue to be litigated as you have opened the floodgates to men competing against women in women's sports at every level all over the country.
Yes, and I think the case of Leah Thomas, the swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, really brought home to a lot of people who weren't paying attention to just how radical the message of the more radical trans movement members are. Because you can see it. You literally watch a biological man who could not successfully compete against other men, call himself a woman, and then win top honors in women's competition. And after the long and decades-long battle to give women the right to compete in sports, Title IX, obviously being a piece of legislation that encouraged that, to now see a lot of the cultural left turn on a dime and say, well, real equality means letting men trounce women and is an unfair, because they have unfair physiological advantages. And that is just not something that's acceptable to most people. And if you look at the polling data, tolerance and acceptance of trans claims is on the decline. And I think it's for this reason. It's this insistence that it's fair when what we can see with our own eyes is that it's not fair, and that it's also a risk, a physical risk to women's security. We shouldn't have men in women's locker rooms. We shouldn't have men in situations where they can, for example, women's prisons, where they claim that it's just because they're a woman, they should be given this advantage. And that is wrong, and I think that tide is turning against that, as it should.
Yeah, I always go back to this because you have to give the sentimentalists a way out, right? Because otherwise they get wooed or intimidated by, well, gosh, I don't want to be seen as unkind. I don't want to say no. I don't want to say yes. I don't want to take a position. Veronica Ivy, who is this trans activist and dude cyclist, by the way, that's not his real name. Veronica Ivy crystallized this on The Daily Show years ago, and I always go back to this because he ironically got right to the premise, and that's where you have to start. You have to get an answer to this question. You have to make people answer this question. And he said, the trans activist said, look, you either believe trans women are women or you don't. Exactly. Mm-hmm. He's exactly right. So you either believe a man pretending to be a woman is the same thing as a biological woman or you don't. So which do you believe? And as soon as you answer that question, everything becomes very clear.
Well, and I think one thing that's interesting to me is the debate going on within the gay rights movement, which spent decades really not demanding special treatment, but saying we just want acceptance in the eyes of the law, the battle for gay marriage. All of this was very an attempt to cultivate and persuade people that they should be allowed to participate in these traditional institutions. Now, people still disagree about that, but they won that battle not by insisting that that up is down and down is up, but by persuasion. That is how Americans change other Americans' minds about lots of things. And we are tolerant. And so when a trans activist says, you have to accept that I think I'm a woman and I get all the privileges and rights that women have, all the protections of womanhood when they are not, that is not actually that's not persuasion. That's staking a claim to special treatment. And that's where Americans push back in the eyes of the law, culturally, socially. Look, most people don't care if a man dressed as a woman uses a woman's restroom as long as he doesn't violate their privacy or duty. That's most people are tolerant already. It's the demand for special privileges, the demand to invade women's spaces, compete against women. That's where people start to draw the line.
Yeah, although I don't think moms and dads want dudes in the bathroom with their daughters.
Well, exactly, because people take advantage of that tolerance, and we've had many cases in Virginia and elsewhere where because they allow men who identify as women into women's changing rooms, we've had registered sexual offenders actually, exposing themselves to children in Fairfax County and elsewhere, and that's just wrong. That's wrong.
The piece that you wrote for Commentary Magazine gets to another matter here that includes trans. It's not limited, but it includes trans that we've been talking about all morning because of the subcommittee that Eric Schmidt, the hearing that he had on political violence that it featured Michael Knowles and others, and just this discussion of what we see on the streets with No Kings, with ICE operations. And that is this belief by many on the left, including the DSA that's platforming Zohran Mamdani, that violence is a legitimate means to political ends. And this has manifested itself within the trans community, quote unquote, such as it is, not just with school shootings, but also with the guy who hatched an assassination plot against Brett Kavanaugh. You commented on that.
Yes. So Nicholas Roski, who did turn himself in when he saw law enforcement, nevertheless had spent a long time plotting to kill Kavanaugh and also other conservative justices on the court because he feared the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs case. So this is a very serious thing. This was someone who planned political assassinations, clear example of political violence. His motives were very clear. So fast forward to his sentencing by a judge. Between that time, Nicholas has decided that he's Sophie and that he wants to transition. And so the judge, who could have rationalized or described why she was sentencing to a very low term, actually, not what prosecutors wanted, decided that she would embrace his claim of transition in order to reduce his sentence. And that to me was a great injustice to the safety and independence of our judiciary, which requires protection from this sort of political violence. But it also sent a clear message. If you're a male violent prisoner convicted of a crime, claim you're a woman, because you know what? You'll get a reduced sentence. You'll go to easier time in a women's prison. And where in the state of California, male prisoners have been raping the female prisoners, so the point where the female prisoners had to bring a lawsuit to try to get these men out of their prison. This is not acceptable. It is not blind justice. This is a judge deciding to side with radical trans ideology and give a violent person a reduced sentence. And I think for me that really struck me as being a new stage in this effort that those of us who feel we're just kind of common sense people and common sense conservatives to push back. We have to say something when that happens. That's wrong. That is a violation of the principles of our justice system. And we'll see. We'll see if other judges follow this district judge's path or not. But I think it's worth reminding people that claiming, if you're a man claiming to be a woman, that should not give you a reduced sentence to prison.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least, particularly when we're talking about a crime as serious as an assassination attempt on a Supreme Court justice. I mean, it's incredible the lack of seriousness with which the left takes violence generally and political violence specifically, and we see it over and over again. Christine Rosen, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, her piece, "The Dangers of Trans," over a commentary. Christine, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And she joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Let me take a moment to talk about my friends at QC Kinetics. They're helping so many listeners regain their mobility free from joint pain. Does this sound like you? Where every time you move, it's a reminder of what hurts? A reminder of how far you've drifted from the life you once had? Well, relief is closer than you think, and it doesn't have to come from surgery. At QC Kinetics, Dr. Caravelli and her team tap into your body's own regenerative power using natural healing factors that help restore and repair damaged tissue, reduce inflammation, and relieve pain at its source. Stop masking the pain. Let QC Kinetics help you regain what pain took away.